Welcome to our webinar. I'm Christelle Vassolet, Director for Communications, Public Affairs and Membership at the European University Association. And I have to say that's not exactly the timing I was hoping for our webinar. And it's really with a heavy heart that I'm starting it, as the war in Ukraine is raging. I mean, you're probably like me old enough and you have heard those tales of civilians being bombed, schools, university being destroyed, and library being burned before, sadly. And especially, I think for a lot of us, it resonates with the war in the Balkans that we had been through decades ago. And of course, there are other conflicts in the world which have revolted us as well. But like the war in the Balkans, the attack on Ukraine is actually a community, almost a family matter for our association, which includes 26 members in Ukraine, 16 in Russia, and 3 in Belarus. So just to update you, our board has already reacted and is going to issue a longer statement tomorrow to support Ukrainian universities and all democratic forces in those countries. We are constantly monitoring the situation, of course. We are in touch with our members in the region, and we are sharing on social media any support that is coming our way so that people are aware of what can be done. Of course, to all our Ukrainian members, we are behind you with all the strength of our association in those really horrible times. So I have to say, last night I really wasn't sure how to start this webinar because almost discussing any other topic seems futile. But actually, I went through my books by my side table yesterday evening, and what I found was actually The Art of Gathering from Freya Parker, which is someone I like very much because she's a conflict resolution expert. And of course, the book is about meetings. It's about events. It's about how to make events and meetings meaningful for everyone involved. And especially in our introduction, there is a great analysis of the fact that the right to assemble is often one of the first things which is forbidden by dictators or people seizing power by force. So what we are going today for an hour online is to meet, to exchange, taking a different perspective, which is really at the core of our democracy. And also an important aspect that we are going to touch upon during this webinar is how to build a healthy and diverse leadership in our universities by looking at the gender elements. But generally, those are the factors that are contributing to reinforcing our democracies and our communities. So actually, the topic we are going to discuss today is actually very relevant to build tomorrow's future. And we are going to start. I don't want to take too much time on that, but please follow us. And if there is any way that you can help Ukrainian members, we are always happy to receive information about that and disseminate them. First, I'm going to thank all the panelists that are going to join us in the coming hours. I will introduce them one by one as they appear. We really have a big panel and a diverse profile. I'm very happy to introduce them to you today. And of course, we will have enough time for questions. We are going to start with a few quantitative references. Let's talk figures and data. Since for the past 8 years, EUA has followed the evolution of the leadership and the ratio between men and women at the post of rectors. We have quite a big membership. You might know we have 850 organizations in total, including 800 individual institutions. So I'm going to leave my colleague, Kamila Kozirog, who's a policy and project officer at EUA, to introduce the topic with a few slides regarding the state of the membership at EUA. Kamila, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Crystal. Hello, everyone. So yes, indeed, each year we publish our data on the situation of women leadership among our member universities. And the reason why we do that is to raise awareness on gender disparities in university top-level management positions. Our latest figures will be published next week, and we will do that to mark International Women's Day. But today, I already want to share with you the trends observed over the years and give you a quick overview of the current situation of women leading universities among our membership. Could I please have the next slide? So in this first slide, you can see the evolution of proportion of female rectors since 2014. And this proportion has steadily increased from 10.5% to 18.1%, which is an increase of 73% over the last 8 years. But despite this rather significant rise in the number of female rectors, especially observed last year, they still account for less than a fifth of all EUA member universities. And now, when we look at the figures from this year, we can see that the situation varies across countries. Around 75% of countries with EUA members have today female rectors. And what also the data reveals is that the number of countries with no female rectors has been steadily decreasing every year. And for example, just this last year, 5 new countries with EUA members appointed female rectors. Similarly, we also are collecting data on female vice rectors, and here they still continue to be underrepresented, but the overall proportion in our membership is significantly higher than in the case of female rectors, and even reached 30% this year. But when we look at the trend, the proportion advances more slowly than the proportion of female rectors. We observed that it increased by 24% over the last 8 years. And now looking at this year data in more detail, again, the situation varies across countries. Female vice rectors are represented in the vast majority of EUA membership. In some countries, they have reached parity, and in others, even outnumber male vice rectors. But at present, there are also countries with no female vice rectors among our membership. So that was my final slide to introduce this webinar. So I thank you all for your attention, and I hand over to you, Crystal.
Yes, thank you so much, Kamila. And indeed, we saw almost a wave last year of new female leaders at the helm of universities, and it's a reason why we wanted to talk to Professor Castiaux, who's one of those female leaders who, for the first time, is at the helm of an institution and a university. So in her case, she's the rector of the University of Namur in Belgium, and she's going to share with us her experience and how it came for her to become a rector. So Professor Castiaux, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Well, when EUA proposed me to participate in this webinar, they asked me to share my experience of this academic journey that recently led me to the position of rector at the University of Namur. The idea was to look at the barriers that I found on my path because I am a woman. When questioned about such topics, generally, I tend to say that I was lucky, and it's true. However, if I really look in the rearview mirror, I remind some moments that made me feel bad and mined my motivation. And such little or big obstacles can explain why we find almost 60% of young women in the bachelor degree in Belgian universities, while you have only 15% of full professors who are female. And obviously, to have more female leaders, we need to have more women progressing up to the highest levels in the academic career. So I will share some little stories with you. The first one, science is not sexy. I studied physics, in fact. When I was in my 3rd year, I was 20. I remember clearly a sentence of one of my male flatmates: "You're not a woman, you're a robot." I realized that from his point of view, probably shared by other people, being a scientist was not feminine at all. It was more than 30 years ago, but this left me a bitter taste, in fact. When I look at the deficit of women in some scientific curricula, as computer science or physics, I think that if we want to obtain progressively a balanced representation of genders, including at the top levels, the challenge is to change the gendered image of those disciplines in general, because you have also, of course, the reverse effect for male in some curricula. A second little story. Academia is too tough for women. I majored from my promotion in physics the year after this little previous story with a master's thesis that led me to the publication of a paper. I had been so enthusiastic with this research process that I asked one of my professors to support my application as a PhD student. He told me that the academic career was tough and that I would have a better life if I entered as an employee into a bank. I really think that he tried to be protective, being himself faced with scientific competition, but he did not give the same message to my male colleagues. I must say that seeing that I was really motivated, he finally supported my application and was of great help during my thesis. A third little story, the chasm between the PhD and the tenured position. All researchers, male, female, experiment this difficulty, and a lot are forced to abandon. When I finished my PhD after a postdoctoral journey in France, I hoped to find a tenured position. Even if I had obtained the highest grade for my PhD, even if I had published a lot of papers, I did not find the support I could have expected. I was said that as I lacked travels, I should have another postdoc. I saw that some really brilliant female physicists were struggling for long. I wanted to found a family, so I decided to leave. I joined the private sector. I don't regret this decision because it allowed me to discover another world, and it was very important for the following steps of my career. But it was the end of my career in physics. Luckily, when I decided to come back to academia, missing so much research, the selection committee for a new position created in innovation management dared to consider my profile, and I was hired. And I was able, thanks to them, thanks to their openness, to relaunch an academic career in a totally different field, capitalizing on my research capabilities from physics and my experience as a consultant in the private sector. Fourth and last little story. Even when you arrive at the top, gender seems to still be an issue. When I decided to be candidate in the last elections for the rector of my university, it was in spring, I had to meet a lot of people, to exchange with them, and I really liked that. I learned a lot. Generally, the exchanges were constructive and very informative. However, during one of those meetings with an association of the university, one of the participants, it was a woman, asked me, if you are elected as a woman, how will you conciliate your private and professional lives? And what is the position of your husband? Once I was elected, I had a lot of interviews with the press. The following question was always there, very often as the first question. As a woman, what difference will you bring in the exercise of your new position? To conclude, I have been lucky. I met some obstacles. I had very often the feeling not to be recognized for my investment, my capabilities, but I had the chance to be supported by my close ones always. I think that the world is changing, that the academic world is also changing. It's not the same as the one I knew when I was 20, obviously, but efforts are still necessary to have a better balance between genders in all disciplines and at all levels of the academic career. The competitive model that universities have followed for some decades and that have been pushed even further by commercial rankings can also be at stake, as it tends to favor standardized profiles who fit into the pattern. But perhaps it will be discussed by other speakers afterwards. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Castiaux. Let's put my apologies. Seems my camera doesn't want to be on again. Okay, well, it doesn't matter as long as you hear me anyway, just for a very short transition. Yeah, I think what you describe is very, very common in what we hear. And it's a great introduction because we see a lot of the problems that have to be tackled. And I will leave my colleague Thomas Jørgensen, Senior Policy Coordinator at EUA, to perhaps put things in perspective in terms of also looking at a broader diversity. And then we will look again at the gender outlook. So Thomas, over to you to provide us with a bigger picture before we go back to what can we do to change the situation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christelle. I'm going to show you some results of a survey we did back in 2019 about equity, diversity, and inclusion in European universities. So broader than gender, but of course, and particularly for the research part, gender was extremely important. If you're interested in the rest of the results from that survey, it's in the handouts on your right side. There's a link to the survey itself. So this is of course, as always, surveys. It's self-select sample, but it shows what universities that are interested in diversity, what they're doing, and what they particularly say is helpful for them to further their agenda. So if we first look at the dimensions, and you might see in a very light gray on the left side what the question is: which dimensions of diversity do you address at your institution? And you'll see the second bar there is gender, and if we here speak about academic staff, that's the second highest. The only higher is disability for students, and that's often because there is a legal requirement to ensure that your buildings, for instance, are accessible. But please also note that genders is by far not the only thing universities deal with. You will see, as you can see, just behind ethnic, cultural, migration background, socioeconomic background, sexual identity, there's an overlap with gender there, etc., etc. Another thing that's interesting about this figure is, of course, here the respondents could only cross gender, but gender does mean a lot of different things in the many different cultural contexts that are around Europe, and you might put them in three categories that are those where gender is extremely broad. Universities that discuss, how many gender neutral and binary gendered toilets do you want on campus so that you accommodate everybody. There are places where gender is only binary, it's only men and women, because that's the cultural context you're in. And then, as a little bit of a curiosity, there's of course the tendency, I think, all over the place to think that when you say gender, you say women, because men, like me, we're of course normal people. We don't have gender. Gender is women. But that's more than a curious side. So point here, gender is very important, but it's one of many diversity dimensions. So if you want to further this inclusive agenda and have a diverse university community, what works? And there's just no competition. It's the commitment from the leadership that is what works. Of course, about half say you also need to involve the target groups. I think hope that actually is higher, because that should go without saying. But I'd also point to the 35%, so about a third, that says you need to have additional financial and staff resources, because that is important in terms of the things you need to put in place practically. You need to have that commitment from the leadership. But if you look at the last slide here, I'm going to show what external support is required. It is additional public funding. It is staff training opportunities. In this context, the special grants are maybe not so relevant, but it does speak to that whole professionalization history of universities that we have seen in the last decades, where you need to have these professionals that know what they talk about, that can, let's say, bring into the discourse what needs to be done in traditionally male-dominated communities. And there are good examples of this, for instance, in hiring, that you want to have somebody who has a professional knowledge of gender diversity in your hiring procedure, so that you can sort of weed out the unconscious bias. That's just one example, but there is, of course, a whole other level of gender awareness, particularly in environments that are extremely male-dominated. One last thing, all female-dominated. This also goes. I'm going into the trap here myself of saying, yeah, gender, that's women. I feel like education can that also be a little bit daunting if you're the only man in the room. Last thing I want to say about this that came out, we did all these figures, but we also did some qualitative interviews when we did them. And one thing that came out very strongly, particularly from research-intensive universities, was we do this not because it's a good thing to do, because there's a moral obligation. We do this because you cannot be a top university today if you don't embrace diversity. It's a precondition for excellence, both because your results will be better, but also because that's the only way you can serve society, a society that is diverse. So I think that's a very important point to have in here as well. The diversity angle, the challenge to particularly get more women into academic positions is not only something you do because it's a good thing to do, but it's actually a precondition for excellence. And with that, I'll stop the presentation.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much. I take the opportunity to mention that so the Invited project is a project that we led recently, is now finished, but the results are on the EUA website, and also in the handouts you have several documents, including the presentations for this webinar and the report. I think you put as well, Thomas, and you put the Invited report in the handouts too, so you can access them directly and of course ask questions in the Q&A afterwards about it, because it was literally a snippet of what our colleagues found. So thank you very much, Thomas. I'm going now to turn, before we address potential solutions and how to improve things, I'm still going to go to Kathrin Müller from U-Multirank. She's a project manager there, and she especially dealt with the gender monitor that they published in November. And it's important, I think, to go back to what Professor Castiaux was saying about the fact that from quite early on, even though you got women at the beginning, they disappear throughout their life at university, or at least it was the way it used to be. So Kathrin is going to give us a perspective on that, since they U-Multirank gather a lot of data on the various various audiences within a university. So Kathrin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal, for the nice introduction. And indeed, back to some numbers. As Crystal said, my name is Kathrin Müller. I work as a project manager for the Global University Ranking U-Multirank. And I now want to give you a brief data-based insight on the role that women play at different career levels in higher education. This is based on our so-called Gender Monitor, a report that we published in November last year, and where we analyzed the share of the gender imbalance in higher education systems. Yeah, let me start with giving you a general overview. So the data you can see here refer to Europe only, but the pattern doesn't change if we look at it at a global, worldwide scale. So what we can see based on our data is that the share of women in higher education declines with every step of the career ladder. So we see that for bachelor as well as for master students, there are slightly more than 50% of female students. This number decreases to slightly less than half of all students when we are at PhD level. and to 45% at the academic staff level. The most striking decline, however, happens if we go one step further, that is to the professor's level, because as we can see on the slide, on European average, only 29% of all professors are women. And linking this back to the topic of today's webinar, this might, if we think one step further, also lead to a gender imbalance in higher education leadership positions, such as, for example, university rectors or university presidents. Because as we know, in most cases, those positions are recruited from the academic staff that's already working at the respective higher education institutions. And indeed, let me say that this has not been part of our gender monitor, but we conducted an analysis for the purpose of today's webinar based on the data we hold in our database on the rectors at the participating universities. So once again, you see the numbers for Europe, and for the almost 1,200 participating universities, we can see that on European average, only 1/5 of all rectors at universities is female. And even for countries that score above average, such as, for example, Great Britain or Germany, the number of female rectors does not succeed around 25%. We have some countries that perform more or less at the European average level, such as France with 18%, but also countries such as Ukraine with 13% of female rectors or Italy with 7% of female rectors, where significantly less women are in rectors' positions than at European average. But let me also mention that according to our analysis, it doesn't seem to be equally difficult for women in all study subjects to climb the career ladder, something that has already been referred to in former talks as well. So this is something that has formed part of our gender monitor. We took into account both the number of female students, but also the number of female academic staff. And what we can see here is that though we have only a few number of study fields that are gender balanced, which means that we have at least 40% for both genders and both categories, we also see the traditionally male-dominated subjects in the lower left corner, and these are traditionally the STEM fields. But as also previously mentioned, there are some few subjects where women are in the majority, and both for students as well as for academic staff. So, for example, this is the case for psychology or education or nursing. Yeah, this just to give you a quick overview of our gender monitor. Of course, if you're interested in the further and more detailed analysis we did with this report, please feel free to visit our homepage and to have a look at the gender monitor. And of course, in case of any questions or feedback you might have for us, always feel free to contact us and get in touch with us. We are happy to hear from you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. And thank you for all the interesting insights also from the other speakers, because I think that the data shows the importance of looking at women in higher education at all career levels, and especially when it comes to women taking over leadership positions.
Yeah, indeed. No, I think your report is indeed very interesting and worth looking at, especially the analysis by specialty, by topics, because we see such a variety of situation there. So thank you so much, Kathrin. And I will now pass on to Norway, to Ella Ghosh, who's a senior advisor at the Committee for Gender Balance and Diversity in Research in Norway, and who's advising universities. Norway or Nordic countries are not the only country who have initiative to ensure gender balance, but certainly have the longest experience with those kind of programs or support actions. So Ella, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here in this setting, and have learned also a lot from hearing the previous speakers. the Norwegian, the status for Norwegian statistics when it comes to leaders and professors is perhaps a little better than the average that Kathrin referred to. However, the Committee for Gender Balance and Diversity in Research has been established at a point in 2004 when our status was not particularly good, and there are very, very high variations between the different universities and university colleges. Today, 34% of professors in Norway are women, and the rate seems to be increasing at about 1% a year. Let me tell you a little about the way in which our background, where the committee works. The committee is appointed by the Ministry of Education and Research, and it's a public body, public funded, and it's independent. Our office is in Universities Norway, but the committee answers to the ministry and not to Universities Norway, so it's a particular construction. Our web pages are run by an office that's under the Research Council of Norway, because it's important that what we do is also research-based and well established. Our daily contacts, as both for the Secretariat and for the committee, are with the universities, the university colleges, but also research institutions in Norway. And in the back, there's the Equality and Anti-Discrimination Act that decides that universities and all the other institutions work according to the equality and anti-discrimination legislation. There have been 6 committees. This is the 6th. The first one was called Women in Research, which is what KIF stands for, actually, the Norwegian abbreviation. For the first 2 periods, women and men in research, and particularly then the lower level of women, and the lower level of women in certain subjects, as Kathrin Müller also mentioned, was the main theme. In 2014, our mandate was expanded to include ethnic diversity, and that got discussed a lot, whether we meant internationalization or immigration or people from the indigenous populations. There were many discussions. In this period, the ministry has added on social background, and this period runs from 2022 to 2025. So the committee has just been appointed, and that committee is very broad. It consists of representatives who are nominated by Universities Norway, which is the Rector's Conference, Association of Norwegian Research Institutes, the Young Academy, doctoral associations in Norway, and the Norwegian student organizations. But throughout, the Norwegian Research Council is a member of the committee. And we also have observers from the ministry and a directorate. There are 12 members, 7 deputies, and 2 observers from the public sector. And the members cover both gender balance, region, discipline, and the ethnic minorities represented. The committee shall give recommendations and support to the institutions in higher education and research regarding action plans and measures, and also help to promote staff diversity. It's supposed to increase knowledge, and that's research and statistics, on how gender, social, and ethnic background affect careers. And also there's a focus in this period on careers and career transitions, at what level there's a gap between the pipeline and the number of people, the proportion of people employed. It's also supposed to raise awareness on challenges related to harassment and diversity and inclusion. The committee works, the committee of 20 plus, which usually is less than that because of deputies, has meetings 5 times a year, but very important as a tool is the site visits and advice to institutions in between meetings. We arrange seminars and conferences, and we have network conference once a year with all institutions. We had a break now because of Corona. And also participate actively in European networks. Our web pages are important. We disseminate information about research statistics, action plans, a number of subjects, how to work against harassment, for example, in those web pages. And advocacy is important. We want to get early, the committee should get early enough into processes to make sure that gender and diversity perspectives are included. And finally, in some areas, we have lack of research and statistics, and the committee commissions or encourages other bodies to commission statistics or research projects to enlarge our knowledge base. Decisive factors in our work are that we are appointed by the Ministry of Education and Research, and that we are several partners working with legitimacy in the field. Equality and diversity are seen as policy areas where you can try to succeed as best as possible, and not as ideology or something that is a wish for development. Committee members mirror the sector. They are so broad-based that when we meet institutions, they can recognize the perspectives. We have knowledge-based goals and initiatives and measures. Using research and knowledge that's at a high level is important when talking to a sector that has that as a core value. We're an equality advocate and a partner in dialogue, and not a compliance body. It's important that though there is legislation, we are not the compliance body when it comes to action plans or other legally decided methods or measures. And finally, it's important for our work that we are independent, dynamic, and have a long-term perspective. That in gender balance, for example, there's a tendency to have projects, and then after the project is over, including those perspectives further is difficult. So having a long-term body is quite important for the sector to continue raising relevant issues. So these are our web pages, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them in the questions. But thank you for letting me speak on this.
Yes, thank you so much. No, it's interesting to see what kind of plans are available in certain countries and see if we can inspire other systems. I see there are lots of questions in the Q&A about data. So some of our speakers have already started replying to them. I think that indeed, this quest for data is never ending, and it's an important start. At least we felt so. That's why we started analyzing our own data to really know where we are and what needs to be done. So there is no specific question for you, and anyway, we'll go back to them at the end. First, I will introduce the last speaker. We wanted also to have a perspective from a funder, from people who provide funding for research, and how they can influence this issue in terms of gender balance and also inclusion, diversity. So it's my pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Mina Stareva, from DG Research at the European Commission. She's head of sector for gender, and she will introduce the latest measure taken by the Commission to support the gender equality plan that was adopted earlier. Thank you. I'll leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. Of course, it's a pleasure for me to be with you, even though obviously I wish that this webinar could have taken place under much better circumstances. So I wanted to start by a quick snapshot. Of course, we spoke a lot about data, and of course, we do have also our She Figures 2021 report providing data at European level. it basically provides the state of play, the reality that I would say you live on your daily basis on the ground. So I would not go into detail. We heard a lot. It's very similar to what was presented, and also to the very interesting testimonial, of course, we heard. So the reality is such: gender equality is a priority of the European research area since many, many years, and women remain underrepresented at all levels, of course, starting from going up to the career ladder, of course, and the numbers are much more striking when we look into the specific science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. With the She Figures 2021 edition, we actually also had a more specific look into the situation of the women underrepresentation of women in the underrepresentation in leadership and in decision-making positions. We actually, among many other priorities, we had a specific policy brief on these issues, where we heard it and we know that access to the highest levels, such as the university presidents, rectors, deans, but I would say also departments or laboratory chairs, is hampered by different barriers. Different testimonials can prove that, many articles and many papers written on that, but we can see some structural barriers, such as, of course, work-life balance, lack of recognition, lack of encouragement, and we can go on. So this is precisely why we actually looked into these aspects and provided a policy brief with some solutions to empower women to take up these roles, including such as support schemes such as mentoring, job sharing, requesting gender balance search committees and applicant pools, for instance, setting quotas, providing specific trainings on unconscious bias for decision makers, and so on. We also looked specific into those aspects. So again, it is gender equality has been a priority, but women remain underrepresented, and we know it very well that women leaders in higher education, in research and innovation, can act as agents of change towards more gender equality at institutional level, and we see that often. And I must say that I'm very proud also to work for Commissioner Maria Gabriel, who is one of such examples of really boosting and fostering an ambitious approach for gender equality and inclusive gender equality policy in research and innovation. So within the new European Research Area policy, as adopted and endorsed by member states last year, we work together with member states, but also with universities, research organizations, and funders to develop inclusive gender equality plans and to precisely open up our policy to intersections with grounds for discrimination, such as on the basis of ethnic origins, disability, sexual orientation, and so on. Very important, the European Research Area Forum, it's the place where member states discuss these priorities, and it is also composed of key stakeholder organizations, and the EUA is a member of the ERA Forum. How this policy is implemented, so we come now to Horizon Europe, where actually I must say we changed gears with Horizon Europe. We really wanted to come up with an ambitious approach for gender equality, and one of the biggest novelty in Horizon Europe is that public organizations, research organizations, public bodies, research organizations, and higher education institutions from the European Union and from the associated countries must have in place a gender equality plan in order to receive funding from Horizon Europe, starting with calls in 2022. We do have 20, not yet. We do have 4 mandatory requirements, which we call building blocks, and also 5 thematic areas, which we consider that the gender equality plans should observe. But what is important here to know is that increasing the number and share of women in leadership and decision-making positions is a process that touches upon all the aspects of the gender equality plan, starting from sex and gender disaggregated data collections and analysis to identify, of course, issues and gaps, to gender-sensitive training, but also organizational aspects, work-life balance, provisions, etc. So this is, I must say that supporting more women in leadership and decision-making positions is really at the core of the Gender Equality Plan, which is also an eligibility criteria for Horizon Europe, and with which we believe that currently is the key instrument that would support a sustainable change at organizational level. So, of course, and I would finish very soon, actually, our main focus now is to support organizations to actually implement such gender equality plans and be ready for Horizon Europe, of course. So we have developed a detailed guidance. I'm trying to go to the next slide, but I'm blocked. Apologies for this. So we have developed a detailed guidance on around the building blocks of the gender equality plans, providing very useful tips and examples.
We have a bit of an issue with your sound, Mina, I think. It was fine until now, and suddenly your sound dropped. Yeah. Is it still a problem? Just looking at the chat. Yeah, I think we have an issue with your sound. Apologies for that. You were almost done with your presentation with two great good practices. Perhaps we can, if you can cut your sound actually, click on, yeah, and come back and we will see if it works again. Otherwise, we will have to start with the question. Just wait, just bear with us for a couple of seconds. See if Mina can come back. Because indeed, there's some of the good practices that we now are seeing across Europe. So it seems that Mina is not coming back. All right, then let's start with some of the questions. Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. Anyways, thank you so much for that, Mina, and apologies for you being cut this way. As I said, the PowerPoints are in the handout, so you can read those good practices at your own leisure by downloading them. Then perhaps we can close up the thing, and I'm going to put my camera on again so we can start with the question. That's it. Perhaps I can have also the other speakers, as there are different questions for a few of you. Go back to the Q&A. So there were lots of discussion in the Q&A about one of the most important aspects, which is really the work-life balance. Indeed, it seems that it's really an important factor. I don't know, perhaps if Professor Castiaux, you would like to go back to it in terms, because you posted a report that documents that.
The question was about the impact of children, parenthood, and there have been studies showing that in academia, in fact, you had a correlation between the fact that the women have children and are in leadership positions, but those studies are rather old. What I posted in the chat are studies that are more recent, from 2020 and 2021, one from the US and the other from Germany, showing that there is an impact on the publication productivity, more on female parents than on male parents, and so that, of course, it had an impact on the career, the following steps in the career. So this is the conclusion that we have in the German study, I think. So this is, of course, very important, because there was also a question in the chat concerning the purely teaching leadership careers, or the question of publications and research support. So we are at the core of the problem, I think.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. And also, now that Mina is back with us, I guess for the Commission, it was really one of the points as well of importance. It was to ensure the work balance, the work-life balance, sorry, for everyone, but as a key feature in a gender equality plan.
Yes, yes, for sure. We actually look for work-life balance at all levels, generally within the European Commission with the gender equality strategy, and this has been tabled since many years now. But for us, work-life balance and supporting more women in career advancement is at the core of the gender equality plans, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. And Ella, is that something as well that you see when you go to universities and look at what they are doing? Is it something as well that you think is a key feature?
That work-life balance measures.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So whether it's something that you see as well as a key measures in when universities are changing their ways. Is that something that then produce an impact?
Oh, absolutely, and the expectation that the only way to achieve excellence is to have a continuous overtime, and that the standard that is set for the good researcher is the researcher who preferably spends as much time as possible in weekends and in evenings, not doing anything but research. This is a long discussion in Norwegian academia, even though we are very privileged because we have leave organized setup in all Scandinavian countries that allow people to have 1 year leave when they are having children. But children don't grow up when they're 1 year old. They have certain requirements, even when they're older, of parents following them up, both fathers and mothers. And we do see there's a difference between mothers and fathers when we look at the report statistics on how much sick leave is taken by female researchers versus male researchers. All these things are followed, but recently, or every 3-4 years, there's also a study on the use of time done by the Nordic Institute of Research on Higher Education and Research. And that shows that though there is a difference between women and men when it comes to time, that differences play a part when it comes to their career possibilities. And there's a difference between foreign researchers, international researchers, and Norwegian researchers. So we're trying to identify how our cultures can change and the rules of the game can change so that it's possible to both produce excellent research, but have an academic culture and rules that allow people to have a life and not just a career. But it doesn't solve itself overnight, no matter how many equality plans you have which state that this is the goal.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, there is also the notion of favoring this work-life balance, favoring equality and diversity, whether actually it does ensure ultimately better performance. And Thomas, is perhaps something that you already posted something, but is it something you want to complement? Because ultimately what we are trying to do here is changing the culture and indeed at the end ultimately produce better results.
Yeah, absolutely. I posted, Nature ran a pretty good series of articles about this. Of course, how do you measure better results? It's often bibliographic outputs, but there is a clear there is a clear correlation. More diverse teams generally produce better research. They have a wider scope of perspective. They have a wider scope of questions they ask. They're like more gears in the machine. So that is clear. But I need to say it's also, if you go into the individual research environments and you look at the research culture and the way things are talked about, and Castiaux gave good examples of this, these commons or ways of behavior. And if you look at particularly very male-dominated research environments, I've personally been exposed to that, and I didn't notice before I got the awareness, and this is where I want to arrive. It's also about the dominant gender, that is often male in the research environment, that gets the awareness of, this kind of comments or this attitude is actually highly gendered and not conducive to diversity, which are often things that are not conscious. Body language, ways of being together, ways of socializing, etc. And that requires to be talked about and get out to the open so that you can have an inclusive environment.
Okay. And Kamila, I don't know if you want to say something about perhaps a research assessment, because I think we are touching also upon that when we are looking at professors who are doing both teaching and researching. Is there something that you would like to add about how research assessment is being discussed at the moment and potentially could also create change?
Perhaps
sorry,
I can begin. I see evolutions concerning, for instance, the use of H indexes, which is, I think, a good direction in order to also consider diversity in research and not only mainstream research. And so also pushing the aspect of quality above quantity. And so this is a current evolution that should be positive for the diversity of researchers in general.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Yes, no, we have started at UA some years ago working on research assessment and careers, and it's going to be even stronger this year and the next. So we think that it's really, as someone mentioned in the Q&A, it's not only about women, or it's not only about it's also about the general culture and the work-life balance for everyone, because not only women are at the end deterred by the fact that there is this expectation that you spend your life doing research and only that. So I see a lot of questions about data as well in the Q&A. Kathrin, would you like perhaps to tell us what's next for U-Multirank? Are you going to continue gathering more data? Are you going to publish the monitor regularly? What it is to expect in that regard?
Yeah, of course, this is always the plan. I mean, to expand the scope of the subjects. As I've already answered in the Q&A section, for now, for the gender monitor that we published last year, out of the 30 subjects we analyze or we include in our subject rankings, 25 subjects were included that were also shown on the slide, because for that subjects we had enough institutions that actively provided data both on students as well on staff, so that it allowed us to calculate the gender balance I also presented. And of course, as it was also mentioned, there were some lacking subjects because for now we don't have enough data on them. But of course, this is always the desire or the plan to move on further and to include additional subjects in the future.
Okay, good to hear. Then I think I would just ask a very last question before we close. If there was one measure that you think will make a difference, what will you pick? So starting with Ella, perhaps, because you're the first one I see on my right.
Looking at the data when it comes to gender balance, working on going from measures that specifically address both publication and career enhancing work for women at the associate professor level up to professor is the one which seems to have the best potential to create a big change.
Okay, thank you. Professor Castiaux, what would you mentioned mentoring a lot at the beginning in your testimonials, like the fact, you wanted a family and, I mean, somewhere you can relate to is mentoring an interesting, or will you choose something else as a key?
Yeah, but I think that, probably the enlargement of measures concerning, if I think of the evaluation and the progression in the career, taking into account the diversity, the diversity of types of careers in the academia, and not only this mainstream career, and valuing also the fact that people have experienced things that they can put into their teaching, into their research, even if it is parenthood. Parenthood is probably an excellent experience to put into your teaching and research. So valuing the diversity and of careers, and it's not only for women, of course.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, if I could just add something, valuing teaching higher than or increasing its relative value to publication. It's also an important thing.
Yeah, we're touching at the fundamentals here, I see. Kathrin, is there anything you saw for the data that tells you that this is one measure you would like to see so that figures are improving?
Well, I think what the data shows is that on the one hand, you cannot start early enough to prevent the leaky pipeline from happening. So not to start thinking at the leadership level, but to really start thinking at student level to push gender equality. And also, I mean, in terms of having in mind the subject differences, we've pretty much focused on female subjects where females are underrepresented now, and we've also know that there are many measures or programs, for example, programs that want to push more women in STEM fields. But having in mind the pattern, I'd say it's also important, if we really want to reach gender equality, to also do something for the other way around. So to also have a look at subjects where males are underrepresented and how we can support them there, so that we really reach equality for both, or for all genders. That's my thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thomas, anything? If you had a wand, what would you, a magic wand, what would you do?
I'm not sure it's the one thing you should do, but it's a thing that interests me, and also when I've been encountered with it, is awareness from the privileged group. Mm-hmm. So it's not only awareness of somebody is a victim, but also awareness of your own privilege, and that is in this context as a man, how the things you take for granted might not be for everybody, and be aware of that difference in situation. And I think that's something I like, because it can really change the culture. It's not that the guests come from outside and say, here's me and I'm a victim in this situation. It's also from questioning the norms and those that set the norm within the community. It's about questioning yourself as a privileged person. I think that's an important thing, and it's not just self-help. It's actually something that can be done professionally, and there are people that do this. And that's the thing I might want to invest in if I was head of department. I wanted to do this.
Okay, thank you indeed. That's incredibly important, and because otherwise, you always have people giving you great examples of women succeeding, and then why not all women succeed? Certainly if they don't work enough. So it's indeed very, very important, and also for diversity, not just gender. Mina, can I leave you to give a last what you see from your perspective? Which think that, I mean, obviously the gender equality plan is a massive change already, but do you see something else that you think the Commission will do in the future?
Oh, in case you can hear me, yes, of course.
Yes.
So for us, of course,
You're back.
Needless to say, the gender equality plan is really the strategy ahead, where we actually do fix or address the numbers, the data, do address specific targeted measures to support women or men differently, and then do address also the knowledge, the content of research and the content of teaching, which is extremely important. Mm-hmm. Going from this, of course, this is our way forward. Going from this, I would say also from my personal involvement for the last 2 years being the head of sector, we need to change the narrative. We need to connect better gender equality and broader equality priorities to the broader research careers, research assessment issues. For me, gender equality should not be dealt in isolation. It should be really put into the overall policy framework. And this is how we actually tend to also address it in the new European Research Area Policy Agenda, precisely also working on removing biases from research assessment. I couldn't intervene earlier, apologies for this. Clearly on our agenda, and this is how we want to go further, opening about our policy to intersectionality, so not only gender equality, and I clearly see that this is in line also with the discussions of today, but institutional change. We really try to work with the institutions involving, of course, the top management, the top leadership.
Okay, thank you for this last suggestion, this conclusion. It was really a pleasure to discuss with you all about this topic. I'm going to conclude on something very, very concrete that we are doing at EUA. Some of my colleagues are working on an EU-funded, actually, Erasmus project called NEWLEAD, and they're organizing 2 focus groups on leadership development and institutional transformation. The first focus group, I was told, will be happening on 31st of March and 1st of April at the University of Ramon Llull in Barcelona. And the second one will be actually in Iceland, in Reykjavik, on 2nd and 3rd of June. So hopefully everyone will be able to travel by then. That's also another factor in our life these days. And they are actually a peer learning capacity building workshop, both of them. So for any senior leader of universities who are interested, that's the place where they will be able to exchange about their experience, about transformational schemes that exist, etc. It's not only about the topic we discussed today, not only about female leadership, but a big part of it will be dedicated to that. And we will send you more information by email. So tomorrow you will receive, all participants will receive an email with a link to the recordings, as well as a link to the page on our website when you will find the PowerPoints and the handouts. And also we'll send you a paragraph about this project, as we hope that many of you will be able to attend, or tell your colleagues that could be interested to attend. So that was a public announcement from me, from a team of colleagues working on the NEWLEAD project. Thank you, everyone. Apologies, I'm late. I didn't keep my time today, but it was really interesting, and I really hope that you enjoyed it as well. So thank you, everyone, and see you in the next webinar at EUA. We have many more coming in the coming month. So, and thank you to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.